Hello everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to be here on this beautiful farm. And thank you all for coming. And thank you, Sarah, for having us here. It's a treat. So anyway, I will begin by reading this poem in Swedish. It's called April och tystnad. Våren ligger öde. Det sammetsmörka diket krälar vid min sida utan spegelbilder. Det enda som lyser är gula blommor. Jag bär i min skugga som en fiol i sin svärta låda. Det enda jag vill säga glimmar utom räckhåll som silvret hos pantlånaren. And now in English. April and silence. Spring lies deserted. The dark velvet ditch creeps by my side, not reflecting anything. All that shines are yellow flowers. I'm carried in my shadow like a violin in its black case. All I want to say gleams out of reach like the silver in a pawn shop.
Good evening. April in silence. Spring lies deserted. The velvet dark ditch crawls by my side without reflections. All that shines are yellow flowers. I'm carried in my shadow like a violin in its black case. The only thing I want to say gleams out of reach like the silver in a pawn shop. So that's all right, Tomas. So those are a couple variations of that same poem. And reading Malena's poem in The Living and the Dead, which came out in 90, the English version, 5 or 6, was actually the first time I read that poem, and it was led me to other translations, and that poem led me to seek out a Swede and try the poem on for myself. So, full circle. All right. Thank you so much for having me, Sarah and the farm and everybody. It's really great. I've had lots of great food and seen old places I used to know in Ann Arbor when my wife was a graduate student here. And I'll read for 15 or 20 minutes. And I wish I could pet the goats, because I have a particular fondness for goats. But no goat poems. I'll read the epigram to my book Home Burial. Is from Jason Malena. Here comes midnight with the dead moon in its jaws. Oh, the rain. This is awesome. This is like my hometown in Coos Bay, where it rains more than Bergen, Norway. It's like 10 months a year of rain, so maybe I have a rain poem. Catfish. The catfish have the night, but I have patience in a bucket of chicken guts. I have canned corn and shad blood, and have nothing better to do than listen to the water's riffled dark spill into the deep eddy where 39 Ford coupe rests in the muck bottom. The dare growing up to swim down with pliers for license plates, corpse bones, a little chrome. But even on the clearest days, even when the river runs low and clean, you can't see it though, you can often nearly see the movement of hair. I used to move through my days as someone agreeable to all the gears clicking in the world. I was a big, clumsy yes tugged around by its collar. Yes to the mill, yes to the rain, yes to what passed for fistfights and sex. Yes to all the pine boards of thought waiting around for the hammer. The catfish have the night and ancient gear oil for blood. They have a kind of greased demeanor and wet electricity that you can never boil out of them. The catfish have the night, but I have the kind of patience born of indifference and hate. Maybe the river and I share this. Maybe the obvious moon that bobs near the lip of the eddy is really a pocket watch, having finally made its way downstream from what must have been a serious accident. The station wagon and its family busting the guardrail, the steering wheel jumping into the man's chest, his pocket watch hurtling through the windshield and into the river. Wind the hands in one direction, and see into the exact moment of your death. Wind them the other way and see all the tiny ways you've already died. I'm going to put this in my breast pocket just as it is, metal heart that will catch the stray bullet in its teeth. I chum the water, I thread the barb, I feel something move in the dark. And I'd also like to say thanks to the University of Michigan and the Zell Visiting Writers program and Meg and everyone over there. It's pretty great. It's always the best when the university and the public have a bridge between the two of them, and that's very rare, I think, in most towns. So you've got a special thing going, and I hope you guys can keep it up. Entering the kingdom. The summer's gone. Now it's the gray machines of the rain. 5:30, November. The sun breaks through long enough to open something along the ridge, then darkness, and more rain. A woman sits in the middle of her living room surrounded by stock pots, filling with the ceiling's brown rainwater and chunks of plaster. Her eyes are the milk of blue granite, and blind as a salamander's. Earlier, a man came with a lawyer who came with a letter from the city, a letter condemning her 3.5 acres for the new pipeline. She believes in many things, that cayenne should be sprinkled along the thresholds, salt along the windowsills, that the pulse should be taken each night before entering the kingdom of sleep. She believes in her hands, that the sand scraped from beneath each nail contains a desert where a family of refugees discusses who will eat the last of the dried fish. She keeps the shadows of her hands in a jewelry box beneath the sink. She keeps the thoughts of her hands in a jar of raisins. She thrusts 2 fingers beneath her jawbone and counts her pulse backward from 100 as the sound of water and metal ferries her into sleep. She keeps the dream of her hands in her dream, where she climbs a rope into the tree of sadness, hands that wind the clock and hands that divide the fish. Let's see here. I grew up in a logging town on the southern Oregon coast, and I read a lot about that experience, and not necessarily about logging, but just the people and the places. And this is a story about my neighbor. The Last Temptation of Christ. I read the Bible literally. I believe waters parted and desperate people and a few stray animals crawled through the mud and oversea creatures that by now must be extinct. I believe men lived hundreds of years and continued to please their lovers and wives. Christ walked on water. I believe in our most daily moments, how we're cornered by angels, devils, ghosts. Why wouldn't I? I've watched my father rip lumber with the skill saw straight as a table saw with a fence. Every winter watched men put in weeks of double shifts at the mill. My mother working until her wrists had to be cut open, the tendons rewired. My friend slipped from my hands and fell like a pinball through a 30-foot redwood, then just lay in the duff laughing at the Oregon rain. Maybe pain is the father of imagination. In the book of John, in pain we seldom admit exists, we find you hoisted above Golgotha, raised in the place of the skull between I am thirsty and it has ended. Between those 2 breaths, you look inward to a kingdom of another world where a possible brother self goes through his life. As it turns out, you've carried him all along. It was his feet you saw stitched to the soles of your own as you took those first steps over the Galilee. It was his body that wandered into marriage and 3 kids and a gradual retreat from his wife. He was a low-end administrator for the city, kept a concealed weapons permit, shot slugs into the clay bank behind the house, had an affair with his secretary most people knew about. Spent nights in the garage smoking Luckies and listening to the CB scanner, the voices of long-haul truckers, policemen, cab drivers, and drunks scratching the empty air of insomnia over the Citizens Band. Is it so hard to believe? One night he overhears the 911 dispatcher give directions to a bend in the road 3 pastures from the house. To take his mind off things, he drives to the curve that mirrors Coalbank Slough's sharp elbow, as if he himself is called. Before the fire department arrives at the turn known for its wreckage and popularity among farmers for dumping livestock into the silt, before the engines scream through the listless dark, He finds himself undressing by the busted guardrail and breaking with his own body through the skin of that November water. How many times will he feel as close to it as he does, swimming down to the half-sunken car, fumbling for her body? How many times will he return to his mouth sealed over her mouth, to breath and ruined water passing between them with no hope of making a life, to the blue and red lights finally arriving? Lord, that could have been you weeks later, drunk and chain-smoking, weeping in the arms of your secretary, the taste of metal in your mouth. She will say she doesn't recognize you. The man she knows used to comb her long hair and talk about cashing in his 401k for a new life away from the coast. She says, go back to your sad wife. But something's filling you with bodiless light. You turn to the untouchable, invisible kingdom already decided for you and live forever. Alrighty. I'm gonna read some new poems. I was telling T earlier of your local radio fame about these new poems I've been working on, and they're mostly really short poems inspired by the Greek poet Yannis Ritsos, who's one of my favorites. These are just a couple of them. Opening Gambit. This is on your little postcard, so you can send it to your mom. Opening Gambit. 2 decommissioned highways cross and continue toward their borders, with the casual certainty the dead carry in their sample cases. Leaning against the wind, I notice tufts of fur in the air in a drive shaft rising from the sand. Then the horse hair of a violinist's bow drawn steadily across my neck. I'm also telling T about this great bar in Coos Bay called Rogers Zoo. Has anyone been to Coos Bay, Oregon? No? Oh, Keith, a couple? Man, that's great. Rogers Zoo is owned by, this wild old hippie kind of libertarian tough redneck art guy, which describes the general Northern California, Southern Oregon milieu. Dirt bikes, guns, and marijuana. And he once took out an ad in the local paper during, I think it was a time when the Bears were winning the Super Bowl, or had just won, or it was the year after, year before, doesn't matter. But he took out an ad saying, more TVs for the big game than any bar in the state. So all these rednecks and loggers come in, and of course he's made an art installation. He's bought every TV in Coos County and has gutted them and mounted them all over the wall. And Roger's a big bad ass, and so these guys come in and they get a beer and say, where's the TVs, and he says, they're right there. He's just sold this bar and retired, and it's a great bar, and I really will miss it. And I think of Richard Hugo's Death of the Kapowsin Tavern. It's the great bar elegy, but here's my little bar elegy. Shooting possums from the back porch of Rogers' bar. The bones in the possum's hand are a set of reduction gears, turning in a machine that brings light to this valley of burnt oil and narrow rivers. My favorite drunks, a few chairs away, laughing hard, forming a theory of everything. Railyard. The Railyard draws an arrow to the edge of my country. The weeds exploding their colors around the empty terminal were once immigrants. They touched their foreheads together in another time. I can almost hear a table being set, a deck of cards slid across the crushed lip of its box. The memory of smoke hangs low in the valley, and though there are no trains, a few dogs run mad beside them through the tall, impossibly blue grass. The afterlife. Even here, the cows look like diesel engines not worth repairing. The rumor of a Ferris wheel buried on its side near the chrome plant is too much to resist. And my brother is flat on his stomach, hands bound, the horses in front of him stamping in place, ready to drag him for eternity as soon as I drop the red kerchief from my iron fist. So a couple new poems. This poem is sort of the cousin of the Afterlife poem, Youre of the Rat. I winch up the sky between the shed roof and the ridge, and stand dumb as a goat beneath its arrows and buckets, its harmonies and hungers. Each night, I feel a speck of fire twisting in my gut, and each night I ask the Lord the same questions. And by morning, the same spools of barbed wire hang on the barn wall above footlockers of dynamite. We used to own everything between the river and the road. We bought permits for home burials and kept a horse's skull above the door. We divided the land, we filled in the wells, we spit in the river, we walked among the cows and kept the shovels sharp. Tonight I'm sitting on the back porch of the universe in the first dark hours of the year of the rat. I'm tuned in to AM 520, and depending on how intently I stare into the black blooms of the sky, it bounces either to a high school football game or to the voices of rage, of plague and prophecy. The wind off the river is weak and alone, like the voice of my brother. He's trying to melt the plastic coating from a stolen bundle of commercial wiring, a black trickle of smoke winding through his body to empty itself into a pool that shimmers with the ink of nothing. If I had faith in the stars, I'd let those four there be the constellation of my brother, lying flat on the ground asking for money. I like the song he almost sings, the one he doesn't know the words to, but hums to himself in these few moments of absolute stillness. And I like how he's resting with his hands under his head as he stretches out among the dark echoes and spindled light of all that black wheat. And I'm going to end on this poem called Cow. Thanks so much for coming out. You made it under the shelter before the Oregon rain got up with you. So this poem is called The Cow. It's dedicated to David Webble. I used to think of this creek as a river springing from mineral caverns of moon milk and slime, but really it's just a slow thread of water that comes from somewhere up north to trickle its way out near the edge of our property. And I've always imagined the tool shed as it is, though it was once an outbuilding for a watermill whose wheel and timbers have been reborn as exposed rafters and flooring for the old money in the valley. The day before my grandfather died, he drove a diesel flatbed to the edge of the creek and paid 10 day laborers to unload this shed. He left his will on the shed floor, which wasn't a will as much as it was a quick note scrawled on the pink edge of an invoice for a few bundles of chicken wire. I found the note and showed it to no one. The shed should have the smell of seed packets and mouse traps. It should have a calendar whose pages haven't turned since Truman. The sounds of usefulness and nostalgia should creak from its hinges, but instead there's nothing but a painting the size of a dinner plate that hangs from an 8-penny nail, a certain style of painting where the wall of a building has been lifted away to reveal the goings-on of each room, which in this case is a farmhouse, where some men and women sit around the geometry of a kitchen table playing pinochle, a few of the women laughing a feast day kind of laughter, and one of them, a fat one in overalls with a quick brush stroke for a mouth, points up as if to say something about death or the rain or the reliable Nordic construction of the rafters. A few of the children gathered in a room off to one side have vaguely religious faces. They're sitting on the floor around their weak but dependable uncle who plays something festive on the piano next to the fireplace lit, a painting of the farmhouse hanging above the mantel. What passes for middle C ripples away from the uncle, the children, the pinochle game, the wobbling note finally collapsing in the ear of the cow standing in perfect profile at the far right of the painting. The cow faces east and stands knee-deep in pasture mud. The pasture is a yellow, perspectiveless square, and the cow, if you moved her inside the house, would stand with the sway of her back touching the rafters. Perhaps the fat man is referring to the impossibility of it all, the inevitable disproportion, the slow hiss of something he can't explain. The cow is gray and blue and orange. This is the cow that dies in me every night, the one that doesn't sleep standing up or sleep at all, with stamps through the pasture muck just to watch the suck holes she makes fill with the salty rot water that runs a few inches below the surface of everything here. The cow noses through the same weak spot in the same fence, and every night finds herself moving out beyond the field of her dumb, sleeping sisters. The cow in me has long admired the story the night tells itself, the one with rifle shots and laughter, gravel roads crunching under pickups with their engines and lights cut, the story with the owls diving through the circles their iron silences scratch into the air. The cow in me never makes it past the edge of the painting, and she's not up to her knees in mud. She's knee-deep in a cattle guard. Bone and hoof and hoods of skin dangle below the steel piping into the clouds of the underworld. The cow cries, and her cry slits the night open and takes up house. The cry has a blue interior and snaps like a bonfire stoked with dry rot and green wood. The cry is a picture of ink that never spills until it does, until it scrawls itself across the fields and up into the trees. The cry works in the night like a dated but efficient system. The cry becomes a thread of black water where the death fish spawn. On nights like this, the cow inside me cries, and I wake as the cry leaves my mouth to find its way back to the shed, where it spreads through all the little rooms of the painting, like the heat building up from the fireplace by the piano. The cry makes a little eddy around the fat man's finger. It turns the pinochle deck into the sounds of the creek trickling into nothing. The cry watches my grandfather weeping over the only thing he said to my father in 2 decades, which he didn't say at all, but penned onto a crumpled invoice that found its way to the nowhere of my hands. The cry in the cow and the painting in me rotates in the night on a long axle of pain, and the night itself has no vanishing point. Thank you so much.
Wow, thank you, Mike. That was amazing. Beautiful poems. Just incredible to hear them read out loud. And I do want to also thank the University of Michigan and Megan for collaborating with One Pause and Sarah. It's wonderful. I will start. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm going to start by reading a poem called The River. If I told you it was a river of white artificial light issuing forth from the overhead fluorescent bulb down onto the cement. If I asked if you could hear the ticking, or if you could see how the light flickered inside the darkness and cold air that hovered in front of where I sat in the car in the empty supermarket parking lot while you were shopping at 3 a.m. If I said I witnessed a seam in the seamlessness, an opening in the sphere only a few steps away from the automatic sliding doors, above which a neon sign bled its filthy orange script in the night. Or if I told you that it was not a seam, but a doorway to the other side, a place where you could stand and talk to the lost and give them newspapers and candy. If I said the night is a journey inside of time, or the night is your left shoe immobile at the checkout. Or suppose for once I did not say anything. Suppose there was no way to say it, only to let it be right there in the quiver of that brilliant moment. Just check the time so I don't read for 2 hours. Excessive. So I'll read a few newer poems now, and then probably read a few more from Astoria, and then I might read a few translations from this anthology that I'm proofreading at the moment. So, anyways, this poem is called "See the Second," and it's an attempt at sort of visually capture, the constructs of time. See the second. See the second, and the second, like quick marks vanishing. And look at the minute, how it has time to collect, like a raindrop on the underside of a railing, before it too drops into the past. Half an hour is a doorway to a hallway of bird flight and graph paper. An hour is a whole room of time, high ceiling with a fray of clouds, below which cars are driving as if they were being filmed. And the day itself is nothing but a towering aviary of light we are in. And this next poem is called Final Analysis, and I had a teacher who always used the phrase "in the final analysis" over and over again. And so I was tempted to write this, and I finally did, or I used it in this poem, the phrase anyway. Final analysis. What if in the final analysis there is no final analysis? What if it just goes on, the way the clouds go on floating this evening, over all the invisible bank accounts, and over the rubble that holds the details of our lives? And what if it's not unlike a film strip of seconds that flows through the years, through all the places we have ever been, even briefly, such as a doorway we stood in while it rained, or a roadside wreck site we passed with its small white cross in the dark on Route 14. Or for that matter, the entire city of the moon, or Cleveland seen from an airplane as it weaves its way down through the high layers of air inside of which we are, and which is everywhere now equally clear. This next poem is based on an experience I had flying on an airplane. It's called "She Kept on Shouting." Just as the airplane was taking off, a little girl in a pink ruffled dress, hair curly and blonde, sitting just a few rows ahead, began to shout, "Where are we going? Where are we going? Where are we going?" And while the plane buoyed up on the air's tilted and invisible conveyor belt, she kept on shouting until her voice collapsed, as if the bottom of it had dropped out, as the earth dropped off, became something else, a new, strangely distant and dizzying thought none of us would ever know how to touch. And this next poem, it's for my son Max. I started working on this poem many years ago, but just recently finished it. He's now 15, but he was probably 5 or even 4 when I started writing this poem. And I remember I lost it for a long time too. I couldn't find it. And then I came across it and I started working on it again. It's called a Maxbox for Max. If a box is funny because it's not a bird, if a box is a river or a shopping cart on fire, if a box is a road that curves down from the sky, or even an escalator going up through the blooming Vigilia, it must be a Maxbox. And in turn, if a box is weightless but fixes to house the entire chewing gum factory in Kanajohari, and if it happens, you meet the people inside the TV before there was TV, it must be a Maxbox. The same goes for any invisible box of falling snow, or any box from inside of which you might catch the uncanny song of a clown's imaginary canary, as I just did here in the lobby of Hotel Bienvenido, where the peonies smell like the wind, and where Max himself can be seen drawing in his yellow and blue soccer shirt the high math of another severely dilapidated roof. And, he said back then, he said, that he actually met the people inside the TV before there was TV. That's how the poem started. And I was just like, okay, that's pretty cool. So this other poem, I'm going to read now, Delicious Water, is, I went to a lecture by a Whitman scholar, and I couldn't resist but write this poem. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this poem, When I Heard the Learned Astronomer. But anyway, that came into my head as I was sitting at this lecture. It's called When I Heard the Learned Whitman Scholar. When I heard the learned Whitman scholar firmly state the names of 3 poets, Robinson Jeffers, Gary Snyder, and Mary Oliver, as being his only literary descendants. When I heard him pose the question, what is our need for magic in the world? I wanted to shout out, the world is magic. When I, sitting, heard him lecture with much applause in the lecture room, how soon unaccountable I became tired and sick, until rising and walking out into the early evening air, blue and mystical in spring. I walked from Nunn Street to Ann Street to Orange Street and on, past the cemetery and the ramshackle Victorian houses, and from time to time I stopped in my silence to gaze at the ornate front porches and the wild gardens where the green river was flowing again through the arms of the trees and where no one was living. This poem is called On a Train in Winter. Once I met my mother on a train approaching Syracuse. She stood across from me in the doorway, connecting the train cars. And as the speeding train lurched and slammed and ground its metal, we hung on to whatever we could to keep our balance. I remember that we wondered if the train was ever going to stop at our station, and that must have been when I saw her eyes, the clear blue eyes I have always known. There are over 7 billion people on the earth, and all the walls that have ever been built are only temporary constructions. They keep us out of the weather and make us believe there are opposite sides, and that we are not traveling. While the winter sun washed over us there, finally together in that moment, it occurred to me that she was traveling alone, and I could feel how worried she was about not knowing where she was going. I could see the lines in her face had deepened, and she was thinner and taller than I remembered, and she could have been any human being. This is a poem called The Effects, and it came out of, I was reading Borges, the Argentinian writer and poet, and he has a poem called The Causes, and I felt challenged to write the effects. And I thought I would go line by line, and I did in the beginning, and then I just lost it, and I just went off on my own. And I sort of came back, but it's kind of vague. But anyways, the effects, and it's a litany. Dawn slowly washing every face. To be awake, but not to need anything. The heart simply deciphering the air with its folds. The neural net of the new leaves sifting the wind. Everything that is imbued by being. The ghosts are on edge when the mirrors are tilted. The ancient coin of the moon high above every cash register. The invisible sand falling through the invisible hourglass of the present. The butterfly and Changsu that dreamt it, and vice versa. The apple complete before it is eaten, the deep red weight of it in the hand. How to dissolve this wandering labyrinth like a lozenge. Along Woodhaven Boulevard you drink from the tulips' yellow and red goblets of light. Behind a wrought iron fence a row of irises hovering like purple contortionists. You walk through 2 infinities and 3 suns. There are shadows of scarecrows on the earth that rise at noon and vanish into the wilderness of their own hearts. Below the steps to the beach you find stones like cat's eyes, the flying whipped cream of the waves, children running in arcs and circles on the sand, and the seagulls floating in the air above them. History is not only in the past. The ocean does not have an address. To reach it, you have to go there yourself. All this was made perfectly clear so we could meet. I will now read a few translations, and there's this is the anthology that I'm proofreading. It's called Star by My Head, and it's coming out from Milkweed Editions sometime in November, and it's in cooperation with the Porter Foundation. Let's see, what page do I have? Yeah. I will read a few poems by a Finland-Swedish poet named Tuba Forsström. She's I don't know, maybe she's in her 70s now, but she's a poet that I've admired for a long time. She never puts titles on her poems, except once in a while, actually, because one of them has a title, but it's a rarity. And let's see here. "5 months old, the summer wafts slowly green around the white basket. A bee whirs past and she makes a small sensible face in her sleep. It's an ancient expression among newborns, something patient and inexperienced. The summer sways in the breeze in tepid shadows and light. She has already traveled so far. She dreams. She already has memories. I sit in the grass knitting a failed sweater. I call it to conceive. Maybe something thinks in her. I sleep, I grow, I sleep, and the clouds move with the wind across her face." The rain is really amazing. It's really beautiful to hear it. Here's another one. It's so strange to have a child. This is actually from earlier books, sort of maybe her, I don't know, second or third book. It's so strange to have a child. It does not look like anything else. Everything becomes more familiar and more unusual. With her diaper hanging, she climbs around this cheerless morning, sings her book about the golden goose, sits down to pee on the floor. Incomprehensible flowing spring in November, and life becomes slow and strong like Mahler's Fifth. Before she falls asleep, she mumbles a list of her friends, just like I do. Let's see, I'll read it just a couple of more, and then let's see. Okay, here's another one of Tuba Fostrom's. There is something about the cab driver's childlike cheek, which means that it exists, that it really exists, that it streams a nightly music along the ice-cold road. Yes, there is a glowing point somewhere for all of us, where rags and masks fall, so that it no longer existed, rags and masks. There we are, eyes, eye to eye, ashes in rain. I'll read two more of hers, and then I'll read a last poem by another Swedish poet. It's actually about rain, so I can't resist. There's a There's a door to the darkness. You get used to it. You get used to everything. Houses and expensive watches. You can sit on the steps and think about trains departing from the large train stations in Europe. Gloves left behind, the scent of flocks. There's a rustling sound outside the sphere of light. Animals happen to walk past. With love, I recall the small littered towns with hopeful names along the road in the violet evening above the prairie. Hard sunlight inside motel rooms, the safety precautions on the wall if you're deaf or your fellow traveler is blind. I stayed too long in the woods. I often call the police. It never pays to call the police. It is what it is. And this last poem of Tuva Fostrom's is called The Angels of Caris. It's one of her few poems that have a title. I don't know what she was thinking. Well, I know what she was doing because she was using the title in a way, but she didn't really need it. The Angels of Caris walk in much too light shoes in February at the train station in Caris, back and forth, smoking. Trains arrive and depart. Tomorrow will be the same. Snow falls lightly, glittering. It falls lightly on their eyelashes. They breathe lightly like aluminum. They know the God-forsaken places. They laugh. Nothing terrifies us more than when they laugh. Nothing terrifies us more than the God-forsaken places and that which is red-rimmed. All right, now I'm going to find this rain poem. Let's see here. Okay. All right. So this is by Werner Aspenström, another great Swedish poet who died in the 90s, I believe. Sort of became big in the 40s in the beginning, and just has a very direct, simple approach to the line, and I love him. And this is called You and I and the World. Don't ask who you are or who I am, and why what is. Let the professors sort it out. It's their job. Place the scale on the kitchen table and let reality weigh itself. Put your coat on. Turn the light off in the hallway. Close the door. Let the dead embalm the dead. Here we walk now. The one wearing white rubber boots is you. The one wearing black rubber boots is me. And the rain falling on us both is the rain. So thank you very, very much.